My name is Rebecca Rains from the Westside branch of the NAACP in Chicago, and we're going to talk about the revision of the Fraternal Order of Police Union contract as represented by the Coalition for Police Contracts and Accountability. But before we get started talking about that, I wanted to give you a few announcements about what we have coming up this week. We're really excited to see some things, and you can find the NAACP at the Westside branch, which is located at 5820 West Chicago Avenue in Chicago, Illinois, 60651. And you can email us at the email address seen and call us at the phone number seen, and we meet every first Saturday. Okay. So I wanted to let you know that we've been having a lot of discussions about the Fraternal Order of Police contract. That is the contract that majority of the police officers that are part of the Chicago Police Department are part of. Like any union, it protects them, it makes sure that officers have their rights, and it generally just determines how an officer will conduct in most ways and in most natures of their position. So as we talk about this contract, which is going to expire in June of 2017, we started to look at some of the things that we felt that were borderline unconstitutional or just out and out a violation of the civil rights of the citizens of Chicago. So we're going to look at this contract in detail. We're going to review the 14 recommendations that the coalition determined would try to make this contract more just and civil for all of Chicago citizens, not just for the police officers who are also citizens of the city of Chicago. So we're going to look over at our first recommendation and find out about what it's talking about. So here we go. Our first recommendation is to eliminate the requirement of a sworn affidavit for investigating civilian complaints of misconduct. So when you go to make a complaint, and when you go make a complaint, you make it through the Independent Police Review Authority, which is going to be changed over to the Civilian Office of Public Police Affairs in a couple of months. But right now, while it is still IPRA, you make that complaint to IPRA, and when that complaint goes through, it goes down to the IPRA line, it comes back up to the Chicago Police Department for their review. When they go to actually file that complaint and you want to make that complaint official, you have to sign an affidavit. And an affidavit is a document that says that you swear that what you're telling is the truth. And you, of course, you give your name, you give all of your information, and you just make this written document of what happened and what your complaint is. The reason why most people have an issue with signing an affidavit, other than the fear of retaliation, is also the idea that they may be called under perjury if something is found to be untrue in that document. So it is overly stating what their statement is. And generally, when you look at other complaints that are coming through from officers or from the streets, an affidavit isn't required. It's really only required when you're talking about a complaint against an officer. The second one relates to the one that we just talked about as far as completing an affidavit, and it says allowing for the filing and investigation of anonymous complaints. So the coalition is saying that these complaints should be made anonymously, because just like when you call 911 and you say so-and-so shooting happened on the street, yes, if the officers will ask you, or the 911 response person will ask you, what's your name, where are you, all your details, but if you decide you don't want to get them, they won't not come. They're still going to come and investigate what's going on, find out what's happening, and see how they can better serve you. Even if it's anonymous, they will still run a full investigation, not knowing about the person who was there. If they found it to be illegit, then they let the case go and they close it. But in the case of a complaint against an officer, you have to give your name and all of your details, which is a very interesting thought about giving your name and your details, because if you tell an officer, another officer that this other officer did something against you, and you have to give your name and your details, then you take a chance that that officer finds out about it and gives some retaliation against you. And knowing how the system as it currently works, that officers are in some cases committing crimes and they're not being properly punished, then there's no reason to believe that if you make a complaint and you identify yourself that you will not receive retaliation, because it's kind of widely known that there is such a thing as a code of silence, and that other officers who know about the misconduct that is going on, they're not reporting it, and so you're out there as an outlier, as a complainer, and in some cases reporting a misconduct doesn't seem like it's going to be as big a deal as taking on the retaliation of that officer should they find out that you did it. The next recommendation is the prevention of disclosure of a complainant's name prior to interrogation of an accused officer. And this one is kind of tricky. It's kind of like we just want to make sure, it's a way of the contract making sure that people feel a certain amount of fear before they make a complaint against an officer. So now, before that officer can be interrogated, they have to be told who is the person that has me accused. Now, while we do have laws in our state that say if you violate a red light, you have to have an accuser. If you run a red light, you get a ticket. An officer has to come through and accuse you. But in a lot of instances, as we all know, when we get into the topic of red light, electronic red light disclosures, that people are not having a person that's necessarily coming and naming them and saying that you did this act. So we see other places in the city and in the system where giving out one's name is not important. It's not what has to be done in order for an accusation to be filed and properly investigated. So we ask this question is, why is that the case when you're looking at an investigation from a civilian, that this officer must know who his accuser is before he's bound, or she is bound, to answer any questions about the misconduct that is claimed. Our next recommendation is the removal and the ban on offering rewards to officers that cooperate or provide information on ongoing investigations. So previously, if an officer acted as a whistleblower and said, you know what, I saw this misconduct of my own partner or another officer while in the line of duty, and I'm going to report it because it was wrong, as we generally recognize officers to be, they no longer can be rewarded for that instance. Not only will they not be rewarded, but they also won't be transferred. A reward can be as simple as transfer me from this district into another district where I won't have to deal with retaliation from my comrades. We have an instance, if you read the Department of Justice report, in which 2 officers were working undercover to uncover an officer who was selling drugs. They were working in coordination with the FBI, and they received retaliation for being the people who discovered that this officer was doing something that was not only wrong but illegal. And when that officer was prosecuted, they were retaliated against. They could not be moved. They certainly could not be rewarded. And they were kind of seen as the scum of the department for having done what was really their job, their sworn duty. Our next recommendation is allow past disciplinary records to be used in investigating and resolving present complaints. So this is a big one that the NAACP has been fighting against for more than a year now. A year ago, we put a law down in the state to say preserve the records. So this law was requesting that all records that are found on police misconduct would be preserved indefinitely so that they could be used in cases to prove that there is a pattern of practice of an individual officer of misconduct. Right now there is a law, as was stimulated by the FOP, that all cases or all records older than 5 years old be destroyed. Because of the inefficiency of documentation being properly processed within the department, there currently are files that date back to 1965 on all police officers that have ever been sworn into duty. They are suggesting that all of those records be destroyed and no longer considered. Additionally, when a complaint is made against an officer and they go before the police board to determine whether or not they actually did something wrong, if there are cases to be sustained or not, you would think that they would look into an officer's records and try to find out if they've done something similar in the past. And quite frankly, as it stands, as we found out again from the Department of Justice report, those records are not looked at all. When an officer goes up and is being accused of a complaint, and the civilian did everything, they allowed themselves to be recognized, they signed an affidavit, they feel like the thing that was done against them is important enough for them to be named and known. They got over that fear, they want justice to be done. They went through the process, and the officer is now before their version of a court. They will not bring up anything that the officer has done in the past because I guess they don't want the officer to look bad. They will, in fact, though, bring up any accolades or awards that that officer has received to make them shine in their best light. So we can speak of the good, but we won't speak of the bad, and then we kind of wonder why none of the cases are being sustained. This is also an important aspect when you talk about how you discipline an officer that has had a complaint sustained against them. If they have been repeatedly done verbal abuse against someone, and has repeatedly been found that they are guilty of this act, every time they do it is treated as if it was done for the first time, and therefore their discipline is not progressive, but is stagnant. They cannot be penalized for basically doing the same thing over and over, something that they're obviously guilty of if they are sustained in the first place. So it's a very interesting thing to have records destroyed. In no other form do we have records destroyed. When we get into other topics that we'll discuss some next week, we'll start talking about the idea of felons, civilian felons, and that if you become a felon in this country, you actually hold that title for the rest of your life. It keeps you out of housing. It keeps you from getting certain jobs. It keeps you from being able to vote in some states. Thankfully, that's not in Illinois. But it has a lot of restrictions and rules against you once you get the title of felon. And so when we look at that as a civilian, that record that you make, even if you make it when you were 18 or 19 years old, will follow you through the rest of your life. The idea that we would throw out or burn a record of a police officer that says that they've done something as little as 5 years ago, and we're going to ignore that as a standard, or even a year ago, because they don't look at any of their past disciplinary actions when they make their next determination, is really, really disturbing, and lets you know that while we do expect the union to do their job of protecting the officers, that is their place and their role in the world, they should not do it to a violation of the civil rights of citizens. And at this point, that is what they're doing. Our next recommendation is to eliminate the provision requiring the destruction of police misconduct records. So that's just basically saying these records are being destroyed, and they shouldn't be, for all the reasons that I just stated. When you destroy records, you cannot create a pattern and a practice. And it makes everyone look like they've done something for the first time versus the repeat offender that they are. When we get on later to our recommendations and we talk about things that they should be fired and things that they should be terminated, those things can never be reached because an officer has not been established as having a pattern of misconduct in their actions. Eliminate the need for the superintendent's authorization to investigate complaints that are 5 years or older. So this recommendation talks to the fact that the superintendent of police must be notified and his permission must be given in order for officers' records to be pulled to find out if there is a pattern or practice of misconduct. And knowing that there are about 12,000 officers in the department, having to go before the superintendent and get a request for every time they need to look back into their records to find out if this is a pattern or a practice of this officer in this misdeed is kind of ridiculous. We've seen from the Department of Justice report that the documentation and the systems that they have for documentation for the Chicago Police Department are ineffective at best. They're highly inefficient, and this is another loophole that a prosecutor would have to go through, or the person who's prosecuting the complaint against the officer would have to go through in order to get the adequate backup to try to say this is why this case should be sustained, this is why this officer should receive discipline, that's more than just a warning. Remove constraints on how interrogators can ask questions. This recommendation refers to how when the accusation is made and a police officer is brought in to be interrogated or questioned about what happened, the investigator can only ask questions in a certain way. They kind of, it's almost like as if the ruling, when you read the FOP contract, it almost makes you think that the officers are being treated like children. Like they're sensitive, soft little pillows, and if you rub them the wrong way, something might happen to them, and their rights will be violated. And so rather than saying, as you would to any other person, and even actually as is done to actual children, those investigators being able to ask those questions as they see fit in order to get to the truth, they have to follow a certain line of conduct, and they can only ask questions in certain kinds of ways. If they fail to ask those questions in certain kinds of ways, then the case can be thrown out, and they'll be deemed to be in violation of the contract, and therefore their accusation against the officer is completely dismissed. So investigators have to be very careful. And that brings us to our next recommendation, which we're going to look at. Specify the information provided to officers prior to interrogation should be general recitation of allegations. So to that point, basically, and this is one of the most ridiculous things that I learned when going through the FOP contract. When an officer is brought in for questioning, the first time they get their questions in their very soft and particular way after the 24 hours is up. And then when they get brought in for interrogation or questioning again, they get to review their statements. And when they're reviewing their statements, they can find out what they said last time and make sure that they say the same thing again. And if there's any kind of false statement that they had in the previous statement, then the investigator or the interrogators will have to file a new claim. So if they find that the officer did lie and they have that down on record, then they'll have to treat that lie as its own allegation. And so they kind of have to tell the officer exactly what they're being, all the different ways that they're being allegated against. Oh, well, I'll cut myself off because it looks like we have a caller. Let's see what they have to say. Hello, caller.
Yes, good evening. Good evening.
Go ahead. Are you there?
Okay. Good
evening.
Hello?
Good evening. I hear you. Go ahead and speak.
I'm sorry. Listen, you're up, young lady. You're up there, every week talking, but about why blacks and Hispanics are mostly, affected by the police. I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
Tell you why. Because we got no job. We have no job. There's 70 claims.
You said you have no jobs, sir? Okay, it looks like our caller was disconnected, so we'll give him a chance to call back. Oh, it looks like he might be calling back now. Go ahead, caller. I can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
This information that you're giving me is extremely important. How can I go by getting a copy of these police recommendations?
The CPAC recommendations that we have been formulating, I don't know if they've been made public yet. I believe it's going to be coming out in a statement soon. But if you send me an email, I can send those to you later on, or contact the NAACP, and we can make sure that you get a copy of it. But I believe they'll be coming out in a press release very soon, as the contract will be expiring in June of 2017. So I hope that answers your question. It looks like we have another caller. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was the one that got cut off. But listen,
okay.
I was wondering why, our people are having such a hard time. And I got it. Jobs. There's so much construction, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of construction going on downtown right now, and not one African American, not one Hispanic construction company has any jobs on there. Oh, you'll see a token here and there, that, but you won't see any of their equipment. But you know what? You just can't blame them. You can't just get around the manual. You got to blame the people you put in office. Every 4 years, they're out there talking about, yeah, we're going to get you some jobs, and nothing has changed. Maybe if we get jobs for our people, all our people, we won't have to be going to court for our children, because they'll be working, they'll have a good time, and that'll be it. We need some jobs, and we just don't have any. Thank you.
I agree, caller. That comes. I think you're speaking to why we have so much violence, which occurs, of course, fields for more police misconduct because of the condition of the people on the streets. And I agree. The public contracts are put out for procurement, and there are a lot of rules and regulations that kind of prohibit minority contractors from being able to get into those massive construction jobs. And some of those conditions need to be looked at. Section 3 violations, regulations need to be more enforced. They're kind of a recommendation or a goal of government entities rather than something that they have to ensure happens. There's Section 3. They have some supposedly preference for MBE and WBE contractors, but it hasn't seemed like something that's really following through. There is some political strong power housing that goes on that allows the same contractors, wealthy, often white contractors, to take those jobs and those positions. I do agree that if people had better jobs and that they had a better place in life, that they would be able to, there would be less violence on the street. People need jobs. That is very true. It looks like we are coming to the end of our show. We made it through about 10 of our recommendations, and there are 14. So I will be on next week talking about, we'll finish up those recommendations and also discuss some other upcoming things. We can continue to fight the power and make sure that we can find rights for all of our people, for everyone. We are trying, very viciously trying to make sure that people are being recognized and our civil rights are not being violated. We have some very big things that I'm not at liberty to talk about quite yet that we're going to be doing in the city of Chicago. We plan to break some true ground, have some big actions going on. So I thank you for watching tonight. Thank you to my callers for calling. I appreciate you all, and we'll see you next week.